Well, good morning, my friend. Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast Friday morning. Good to have you along with me as we end out this week. And this has been a week that we get to serve the Lord. Hope that you've been serving the Lord. Hope that you've been going out trying to reach somebody for Jesus Christ this week to get them in the church this coming Sunday. Our goal every week ought to be I'm working to have somebody in church on Sunday morning. You start on Monday, work all week long, always trying to bring someone to church. My friend, if we start on Monday, it's a whole lot easier to get somebody to come than if you wait till Saturday. And I'd encourage you every week, let's work towards that end of the week, keeping our eye on Sunday, trying to get somebody into church. What a great goal you ought to have every week, trying to get somebody into church. Well, today, let's talk about standing out among the rest. In Acts chapter 13, verse 22, the scripture says, "And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom he also gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will." Now, something made David stand out among everybody else in all of Israel. When Saul rebelled against God's commandment, God looked for someone. Now, he didn't just look at one spot. He looked over all of Israel, looked for someone that he wanted to lead his people. Now, one man stood out among all of Israel, and that person was David. See, what was it? We have to ask ourselves, was it that David was sinless? Was that what it was? No, David was a sinner like everyone else. Was it that David was talented? Absolutely not, though I think he was talented. That's not why he stood out. There was no special talent that the scriptures describe David as having other than playing the harp. And I don't think that's why God chose him. Was it that David had a great personality? No, the scriptures never one time describe his personality. So was it that David, maybe it was that David came from a golden spoon lineage? No. David's family was like every other family in Israel. The scriptures never tell us that his brothers held rank in the king's army. However, there were two things that caused David to stand out in God's eyes that moved God to have David anointed as king of Israel. First, David was a man after God's heart. David pursued winning the heart of God. You see, that's what he wanted to have God's heart. David lived his life trying to get close to God. He not only wanted to be close to God, but he wanted God's heart to be his. Now, this is the key. David wanted to have the heart of God so that he could do the right thing. He did not want his heart to influence what he did. So he spent much time with God to have God's heart replace his. Second, David desired to fulfill all of God's will. Now, David was willing to surrender his will for God's will. And David made it his life to make sure that he did everything God wanted him to do. He didn't want to do part of God's will, but all of God's will. David longed to please God and to do his will for his life. Now, the key to these two things is that David did these things before he had position. Get that now. David did not say that he would do these things so that God would give him position. David did these despite not having position. David did not bargain with God to do these things if he would bless him. David did these things before God's blessings. Whether or not God blessed him was not the point. That's what David wanted. These two things grabbed God's attention. But what grabbed God's attention was that David was doing these things, though he thought nobody was watching. Now, do you want to stand out among the rest? Do you want God to notice you? The key to getting God to notice you is to pursue his heart for the purpose of pursuing his heart. Don't pursue the heart of God so that you can get a position or to have notoriety, but pursue the heart of God because you desire to have the heart of God so that you can influence more people for Christ. Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart." So understand, to have God's heart is done by delighting in God through his word and prayer. When you delight in God, he replaces your heart with his. It's not delighting in God so you can get something from God that grabs God's attention. It's delighting in God because you want to delight in Him. That's what gets His attention. So, doing all of God's will for the purpose of doing all of God's will without a desire for position always will cause you to stand out in God's eyes. Many are waiting for God to give them position before they do His will, when God looks for people who will do His will for the purpose of pleasing Him. Now, you'll easily stand out in the eyes of God if you do all of God's will, not for position, but because you want to obey God, and for no other person than just to please Him. My friend, what causes God to look down from heaven is He sees people that when nobody knows them, when they have no position, they're pursuing His heart because they just want God's heart. They're pursuing His will, to do all of His will, just because they want to do all of His will. That's the secret. Too many people do things so they can get recognized, so they get position. David did these things because he wanted the heart of God, and because he wanted to, having the heart of God caused him to want to do all of God's will. Now, the key is this: delight in God. You delight in God, God takes your heart out, puts His heart in. Then you've found the heart of God. But then when you find the heart of God, doing all of God's will is not a complicated thing. It's easy to do. And God notices those who are like that. So if you're not doing something right now where you are, don't expect God to use you. If you're not soul winning, you're not running a ministry, you're not building something for God, you're just kind of floating through life. Don't tell me that God's will is for you to do something. God finds those who are doing something. That's the ones that He calls. And when you get that mindset, you'll find out God's will will find you. And God will find you because it won't be hard, because you'll be so different from everyone else. God notices and says, now, there's that person I want to use because they're pursuing my heart. They're doing all of my will, not because of trying to be recognized, but because they want to be close to God. My friend, this ought to challenge you today. Let's get close to God. Let's try to delight in God. Let's go soul winning. Let's be faithful to church. Let's do all of God's will. And when you do that, God replaces your heart with His. And then He notices you, and then He uses you in a great way. Well, I hope this is a great help to you today. Now, let's remember this weekend as we go about all weekend long. Be good to everyone. Everyone's having a tough time. Have a great weekend, my friend.